dich hören, lass dich nie mehr alleine. Was ich dir hier verspreche, ist, dass das mit uns ewig bleibt. First of all, I would like to welcome Philippe. Hello, good morning, Philippe. Warte schnell. Audio ein. Oh my God. Can you hear me? Hello.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes. How are you?
Perfect. I'm great.
Okay.
Especially after such a start. So that's wonderful.
Okay, super. I'm happy. I will just highlight you 1 second, please, so we can all see you better. Yeah, so I just hand over the microphone to you, and we are so curious to know what you have to tell us. Are you stressed, by the way?
As it's the topic of today, sure. No, I must admit this is my first Zoom presentation, so quite curious how that will work out. Especially since I'm planning some interactivity, and it's interesting. I mean, the topic we're covering today is acoustics and how we perceive it, and I think that's one of the major challenges in such a setting, because of the delays and the different types of microphones. People are in noisy environments. It's quite challenging, probably more challenging than what we'd like to admit. Does everyone see my screen, actually? It should be shared by now.
Well, I see it. Yeah.
It should be.
It's perfect.
Increased in size now. Is it good now? Perfect.
Yeah.
Cool. So before I venture into talking a bit, I actually like you to pull up the YouTube video and focus once more on the sound that YouTube video is going to play to you for about 1.5 minutes. The video is a lot longer. It's about, I think, 7 minutes, but it's enough to get a first impression. And what I'd like you to do is, first of all, listen to this with your headphones on. So don't listen to this on your cell phone or with your laptop speakers. And second, please write your first and maybe also your second impression in the chat, so I can see some of your reactions after those 1.5 minutes. So I'll let you pull it up.
Okay.
Curious to hear.
I just recap. The link is in the chat. Please mute yourself. Give yourself 1.5 minutes to listen. And when you're done, when you're back, it would be cool if you could put on the reaction, the thumb up reaction, so we know that you're done with this one. Okay, so let's go.
somehow I can't enter anything into the chat. Entschuldigung, auf Deutsch. Also ich kann nichts im Chat reinschreiben. Jetzt geht's.
Okay, so I think we can start to wrap this up again. Can everyone hear me again? Okay, so that's the funky part about Zoom. Doing something like this probably always takes longer than expected. I'm really interested to read all the comments you're posting, and I'm actually happy that you noticed something, first of all. And interesting the choice of words you guys use, like immersive, surrounding, like I'm there, it feels real. Those seem to be the words that are kind of popping to your mind when you listen to this. So let me tell you what you heard. What you heard is actually really simple. It's a recording that has been done on a torso, on a head actually, with two microphones. The microphones are stuck into the left and the right ear, which is then referred to as the binaural recording. And what this does is it enables your brain afterwards to then perceive this as a sound played in space and not a sound played out in a flat environment. But what's really happening is that your brain is doing wonderful work. Your brain is doing work it's doing every day. And what you hear there is really nothing new. It's what you and I experience every day. And it's what we take for granted. Because every time we are somewhere, we have different sounds, coming our way. And our brain is constantly trying to understand where these sounds are coming from. And I tried to depict this on this first slide to show you that there's obviously a very complex interaction of direct sound waves hitting you, for example, from the instrument playing directly in front of you, hitting your head, and then a lot of primary, secondary reflections and sort of waves bouncing off the walls and surfaces around you, which obviously arrive at your ears a little bit later. And ultimately, this time difference of sound arriving at your ears, and especially the two microphones, the two ears you have, then are very valuable into your brain to process the location in space of the sounds you hear. So I guess my point is, what you hear and what is presented as something very novel, and actually what marketing companies present as something very innovative, new. They also use the word immersive. They use the word 3D audio. That's really not new. What's new is that we now have technology which is able to, record that amount of data to play it back to you, but not actually the way how to process that, because that is all happening in your brain. Okay, but before we now get into all these details, let me tell you what I actually wanted to cover today. I wanted to cover 3 major points. The first is really about acoustics in general, to talk a bit about why acoustics is something I find personally interesting, and also something which is truly relevant to our everyday lives, and also the relationship to stress, which probably makes the link to today's topic, right, Rachel? Second point is I'd like to briefly introduce you to Rocket Science, my company, and what we do with acoustics is sort of the third point. I brought some projects with me I'd like to show you. They are all very different. And I understand that you can ask questions after the presentation, right, Rachel?
Yes, they can.
That's probably easiest.
Yeah, ask them now in the chat, and we will collect them and ask you later.
Perfect. So let's dive in. Did I just close the wrong window? No. Here we go. Okay, so let's talk about the first point. Let's talk about acoustics. Actually, I mean, this is kindergarten stuff, but I think a lot of people tend to forget this in everyday life. We have 5 senses, right? The world, however, currently seems very dominated by particularly one sense, and that's the visual part, everything we see. And this has become very apparent to me also during Corona. I mean, everyone now does these, crappy video calls, and video quality is typically relatively good. Audio quality is always very bad. However, people don't seem to notice how much that is affecting them. I personally noticed that, spending 8 hours in a video chat is so tiresome compared to spending 8 hours in a meeting. And I believe a lot of that is actually attributed to the fact that, you're wearing headphones, or you're concentrating much more to actually listen to some really crappy audio stream someone is broadcasting to you, because it's maybe a little bit delayed, or your brain is trying to filter out what he's actually saying, so to separate information from crap. And that is really using a lot more of your brain cells than you're probably willing to admit. But my point here is that all of these 5 senses, they affect us every day. They are part of our toolbox we have as humans to navigate our world, but I think we're not so conscious about them. And my goal today is really to bring this oral domain, the acoustic domain, a bit more to your attention. And I like to start with some common misconceptions. Now, some of you might know some of this out of experience, but throughout my career, I noticed that, also a lot of experts who work in this domain really are not really that conscious about these points. And the first one, I think, is a really striking one, because most people think that loud is bad, quiet is good. And I think this fits into some of a good world view of black and white. However, it's not like that. Let me give you some examples. You can be at a rock concert obviously pre-corona, and you can easily have 100 dB of sound coming your way, and 100 dB is already very loud. And you're probably not going to think that's very loud. You probably think that's too little. It should be, you know, even louder. And I don't think you're going to be annoyed if that's the type of music you like. Now, if you stand next to the train tracks and a cargo train is passing you, that's going to be about the similar amount of noise, maybe a bit louder, tad louder, depending on where you stand. Most people are most likely going to be super annoyed by that and think that's the most, you know, loudest thing I've ever heard. I think even more interesting are beeping sounds, for example. If you hear a beeping sound at 100 dB, you're going to want to die. And probably not so much, again, if you're at that rock concert. So I guess my point is it really depends on what type of sound is coming your way and not so much how loud it is. So don't be too black and white about that distinction. Second point seems obvious, but is not. So not everyone hears the same, meaning your ears, first the physical capability to actually hear sounds differs, and heavily by age. You might have noticed, or maybe some of you have tried these apps where, you know, you play some high frequency sound to your kids, like some 18 kilohertz sound, and they are super annoyed. They want to leave the room, and you don't even hear that something is playing, because after the age of 20, your hearing capability in terms of high frequency content you can hear degrades heavily. If you grow older and older, that keeps on diminishing.
Sorry.
Did you just mute me? Was it something I said?
No. Sorry, accident.
Probably the train passing by in my office, because we have a super loud office. Us working in acoustics, we decided that we get the worst office possible, so it's super loud, so we can always show our customers what's bad. Anyway, so my point is, it really depends on the individual, and it also depends on culture. So there are certain sounds that might seem alerting to some people and less to others. Just to give you one example, probably here in Switzerland, we don't think cowbells are something annoying, and we don't really think there's something alerting. Whereas in other cultures, that could be perceived as something very different. The third point, mental health, is a very important one, although a very fuzzy point. What I mean by mental health is it really depends on your mood. It depends on how you feel about many things, and it's probably not that such a surprise when I told you earlier that a lot of the marvelous processing is actually happening in your brain. I don't think we have a really good understanding of what's truly happening up there up until now. I'm also not a neurologist, so don't quote me on that. But I did notice throughout my career that things that occur in the physical space, in the real world, are perceived extremely differently. And there's definitely a correlation between, you know, the type of the mental state people are in with that physical space. Let me give you an example. We've seen people who suffer from perceiving very low frequency noise. They suffer in a way that they say they can't sleep. They They also have problems concentrating. They say it's affecting their body in a way that they feel super stressed. Now, you can go to these places and take measurements with, actual instruments based on the laws of physics, and in 1 out of 2 cases, unfortunately, it's really hard to prove that this phenomena this person is describing is actually there, which is a super complicated situation, because obviously this person is highly affected by something, but it's not necessarily coming from the outside. So there's something happening where either the ears or maybe the brain itself is really playing a lot of tricks on this person's body. Whereas in other situations, this person is actually experiencing something which is not directly audible, but definitely, felt by the body. Because just as a remark, it's not only our ears that perceive sound, it's actually our entire body, depending on the frequency. Maybe times you notice that you feel in your chest or you're weird. It's actually the way it works. And my last point is about representation of such noise. And probably most of you have come across the term of decibel or dB. And some of you might have seen this term accompanied a lot of gibberish following it, dBA or dB thing, and so forth. My experience is this is a very, very, very difficult scale to understand, and numbers are easily thrown around, especially in marketing, to sort of convince people just with a very simple method, which is higher is better and lower is worse. And that's just not the way it works, in particular because dB is a log scale, meaning it's, 1, 2, 3, the spreading in between those numbers is not the same. To give you an example, plus 6 dB is actually not, plus 6, it's plus 100%, which is quite significant if looked at from linear goggles. So my point is, it's very easy to come to conclusions with these values, but it's not very easy to come to the right conclusions. And you should be very careful in how people use this term. Maybe as a rule of thumb, just focus on your intuition if you can't really make sense of those values. So I hope these 4 points cover up some of the things you might have experienced already when talking about acoustics, and give you a bit clearer view on what's happening there. And I hope I was also able to illustrate why acoustics is something of relevance. But now, as the next point, let's go to actually looking at some tips of what you can do, especially in an office environment, to make your everyday life a bit more comfortable. As always, there's no general rule because it always depends on the individual situation. But I've brought you some points which I think are easy thinking points to consider, and then just ask yourself some questions whether that is actually the case in your location or not. So let's start with zones. It seems obvious, but it's not so obvious. Zones means that you have, and I mean, if you have the luxury of space, use it. Meaning, don't put your cafeteria in the middle of your office because you'll have people chatting all the time. And, that brings me to the second point. people chatting is actually something very interesting to the brain, because what your brain does is it's a big bullshit filter, and it tries to separate information from nothing. And information to the brain is typically something which comes through speech. So, I mean, you've probably caught yourself in a situation where you're trying to concentrate, but somehow you can always hear that person 5 meters from you talking on the phone, even though that person is talking very quietly. And that's due to the fact that your brain sort of has like a lock-on beam capability to, you know, see where these information coming from, and then you lock onto that, and then it tries to filter out all the rest. So zones help you to actually, you know, reduce that temptation the brain is actually feeling. Example of a waterfall. Most people like the sound of water, or even the sound of a waterfall. Saying my internet is unstable. Can everyone still hear me? Okay. Weird. I just continue. So the waterfall is actually something very loud. A waterfall can be anywhere, you know, north of 80 decibel when you're standing quite close to it, but still you have a great temptation to feel relaxed. Now, picture the situation where, and I'm trying to make an extreme example to make my point, where you have lots of noise. You know, you maybe have a little coffee machine here, you maybe have a printer in one area, you maybe even have someone, you know, stapling all the time, like cluck, 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 cluck. So you have all these very annoying noises. They're not very loud all by themselves, but they're super annoying again, because your brain starts to isolate them and starts to sort of extract the information out of it. Now, if you would play some waterfall music, waterfall recording on top of that, not very loud, but it would start sort of mashing all of this together and cloaking all of those sounds, and your brain would start to drain in this cloaking, and the result is that you'd feel much more relaxed, because this situation is much more missing the word here, monotone in German. That's actually something our brain likes when we try to concentrate and when we try to be very focused on work. Masking can be done, you know, even with the simplest of sounds, something like pink noise, which is something which contains absolutely no information whatsoever, and that's why our brain likes it so much, to not focus on it. The last point is the point I personally don't like too much. I also think it's something which has become very popular, but it still helps, and it's to isolate yourself anywhere. I mean, when you commute, you see a lot of people wearing headphones these days. You see a lot of people wearing headphones in the office. Especially those with active noise control help you to zone out a bit, because it creates sort of this virtual bubble around you. I still think this should be kind of your last resort, because and that's maybe more the social side. It also puts some social restrictions on you. I think people with headphones on are sort of harder to approach. but that's really just my personal taste. I hope these tips help you to maybe look at your office from a different point of view and maybe come up with some ideas. Sometimes I think my major takeaway is sometimes simple things can really help a lot. And I deliberately did not bring, you know, like hard fact acoustic tips, like pull up this wall and separate your desk from the other desk with this type of material, because it's very easy to fall into the trap of just buying some great material, but then not looking at the situation globally. So always do that first, please. This brings me to the second point, and actually more of what rocket science is and what we do. Rocket science is not a space company. We don't build rockets, and we haven't been to space, unfortunately. We chose this name because we sort of play with the American expression, it's not rocket science, because a lot of things we do are really at the edge of what's possible by the laws of physics. And most of the people that work at our company, so we're a small company, we're 9 people, but most of the people who work here are actually scientists. We have 2 PhDs, actually one of them pictured in this. So this is a real picture I shot just in everyday work. And I chose these words very carefully because I think all of them are truly relevant to the type of work we do. They're truly relevant to making a difference with our customers. And I think it's one of the big reasons, apart from the actual hard facts, why customers pay us to work with them. So let me dissect that a bit. Geeks is something, you know, describes a person who's really passionate about what they do. And I think it also describes nicely people who maybe are a bit unconventional. So that brings people to come to conclusions which might not be so obvious. And that's definitely something which is needed, even, you know, particularly today. And there are a lot of nice business words for this, right? Like out of box thinking or sort of like interdisciplinary work. But I think all of this cannot be commanded. It needs to be something that is actually lived through a process that people bring to the table without you telling it to them. Which brings me to the other words: playing, exploring, building. That's really something which also I think has become very popular in thinking processes or any type of innovation process. I also believe this needs some natural. It's especially hard to then find the border between you know, being a complete free space and then coming to conclusions. That's something that needs to be happening, especially if you want customers to sort of be continuous customers of yours. They most of the time are looking for results, and that's something. So to wrap that up, that's something we do every day. Is that we try to solve scientific challenges for our customers. Typically in the domain of acoustics, typically that is related to active noise control. So, you know, our customers have any type of noise or vibration issue, and then they approach us to sort of investigate, explore, or solve a new product dimension of their daily challenge. which is obviously connected to an added value. And this requires people that can follow through in a very uncertain, sort of always moving process, which is still coming to an end. So that's rocket science, but let me be a bit more specific of what that really means in every day. So as I promised to you, I brought 2 examples of projects we've been doing. The first project I brought is a collaboration we're still doing with a furniture company. And they have different types of furniture, and their unique selling proposition is that they have very basic wooden furniture, which has a lot of technology integrated without it being visible. So they sell interactive furniture. So picture this lamp. This is a lamp, as the name says. It has light, to my surprise. And it also has a beamer installed within the lamp. So it projects a nice picture onto the table, which allows you to interact with any type of content projected onto that table. And what we did with that company is to bring this lamp to life in the acoustic domain. So again, this was a very visually dominated product, right? It looked nice. It had this projection. It played with different colors of light, different sort of temperatures. But it even if you played interactive content, it had no way of playing back audio. And what we did is we came up with a very novel way of exciting the wooden structure around that lamp, and actually using the entire surface as a loudspeaker, which has its appeal from many different sides. First of all, the function is something that's not directly visible. So I think you wouldn't perceive this as a loudspeaker in a first instance. And second, it has a certain wow effect to it, because as you don't expect it, you'd be quite surprised to hear that this lamp actually sounds pretty much like a Sonos boombox, right? And then when you carry on and try to explore, you start to notice that this lamp can even play, content that maybe has some punch to it. And that brings me to something again, which is a bit more in the trick box area, and connected to what I told you at the beginning of my talk about how our brain perceives sound. So this lamp has no capability of playing back low frequency noise. So the typical bass, the typical punch you feel when you play any type of electronic music or rock music, or probably any type of modern music, has a lot of low frequency content. And in order to do so, you need a lot of volume. You need to move actual air around so you can feel it. Yet it's astonishing that, these small boom boxes, or now also this lamp, is capable of playing this type of content. And there are certain tricks you can do to put your mind into a state that it thinks it's perceiving this type of sound, but it's not actually receiving it. And those are really the things we try to tackle in such a project, to come up with, a very neat solution on the one hand side, but then on the other hand side, a very neat solution from a producer's point of view, that you have a product that's actually affordable, and a product that